Chapter 12 of The Little Minister. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nathan C. Jones. The Little Minister by J. M. Barrie. Chapter 12. Tragedy of a Mudhouse. The dog cart bumped between the trees of Kadam, flinging Gavin and the doctor at each other as a wheel rose on some beach root or sank for a moment in a pool. I suppose the wood was a pretty sight that day. The pines only white where they had met the snow, as if the numb painter had left his work unfinished, the brittle twigs snapping overhead, the water as black as tar. But it matters little what the wood was like. Within a squirrel's leap of it, an old woman was standing at the door of a mud-house, listening for the approach of the trap that was to take her to the poorhouse. Can you think of the beauty of the day now? Nanny was not crying. She had redd up her house for the last time and put on her black merino. Her mouth was wide open while she listened. If you had addressed her, you would have thought her polite and stupid. Look at her. A flabby-faced woman she is now, with a swollen body, and no one has heeded her much these 30 years. I can tell you something. It is almost droll. Nanny Webster was once a gay flirt, and in Airlie Square there is a weaver with an unsteady head who thought all the earth of her. His loom has taken a foot from his stature, and gone are Nanny's raven locks, on which he used to place his adoring hand. Down in Airlie Square he is weaving for his life, and here is Nanny, ripe for the poorhouse, and between them is the hill where they were lovers. That is all the story, save that when Nanny heard the dog cart, she screamed. No neighbor was with her. If you think this hard, it is because you do not understand. Perhaps Nanny had never been very lovable, except to one man, and him, it is said, she lost through her own vanity. But there was much in her to like. The neighbors, of whom there were 2 not 100 yards away, would have been with her now, but they feared to hurt her feelings. No heart opens to sympathy without letting in delicacy, and these poor people knew that Nanny would not like them to see her being taken away. For a week they had been aware of what was coming, and they had been most kind to her, but that hideous word, the poorhouse, they had not uttered. Poorhouse is not to be spoken in Thrums, although it is nothing to tell a man that you see death in his face. Did Nanny think they knew where she was going? Was a question they whispered to each other, and her suffering eyes cut scars on their hearts. So now that the hour had come, they called their children into their houses and pulled down their blinds. If you would like to see her by yourself, the doctor said eagerly to Gavin, as the horse drew up at Nanny's gate. I'll wait with the horse. Not, he added hastily, that I feel sorry for her. We are doing her a kindness. They dismounted together, however, and Nanny, who had run from the trap into the house, watched them from her window. McQueen saw her and said glumly, I should have come alone, for if you pray, she is sure to break down. Mr. Dishart, could you not pray cheerfully? You don't look very cheerful yourself, Gavin said sadly. Nonsense, answered the doctor. I have no patience with this false sentiment. Stand still, Lightning, and be thankful you are not your master today. The door stood open, and Nanny was crouching against the opposite wall of the room, such a poor, dull kitchen, that you would have thought the furniture had still to be brought into it. The blanket and the piece of old carpet that was Nanny's coverlet were already packed in her box. The plate rack was empty. Only the round table and the 2 chairs, and the stools and some pans, were being left behind. Well, Nanny, the doctor said, trying to bluster, I have come, and you see Mr. Dishart is with me. Nanny rose bravely. She knew the doctor was good to her, and she wanted to thank him. I have not seen a great deal of the world myself, but often the sweet politeness of the aged poor has struck me as beautiful. Nanny dropped a courtesy, an ungainly one maybe, but it was an old woman giving the best she had. Thank you kindly, sirs, she said, and then 2 pairs of eyes dropped before hers. Please to take a chair, she added timidly. It is strange to know that at that awful moment, for let none tell me it was less than awful, the old woman was the one who could speak. Both men sat down, for they would have hurt Nanny by remaining standing. Some ministers would have known the right thing to say to her, but Gavin dared not let himself speak. I have again to remind you that he was only 1 in 20. I'm drowsy, Nanny, the doctor said, to give her something to do, and I would be obliged for a drink of water. Nanny hastened to the pan that stood behind her door, but stopped before she reached it. It's tomb, she said. I didn't think I'd needed to fill it this morning. She caught the doctor's eye and could only half restrain a sob. I couldn't help that, she said apologetically. I'm right angry at myself for being so ungrateful-like. The doctor thought it best that they should depart at once. He rose. "Oh, no, doctor," cried Nanny in alarm. "But are you ready?" "Aye," she said. "I have been ready this 2 hours. But you might wait a minute. Hendry Munn and Andrew Allardyce is coming yont the road, and they would see me." "Wait, doctor," Gavin said. "Thank you kindly, sir," answered Nanny. "But Nanny," the doctor said, "you must remember what I told you about the place you are going to. It is a fine house, and you'll be very happy in it." "Aye, I'll be happy in," Nanny faltered. "But, doctor, if I could just have bidden on here, though I wasn't happy. Think of the food you'll get, broth nearly every day. It'll be terribly enjoyable," Nanny said. "And there will be pleasant company for you always," continued the doctor, "and a nice room to sit in. Why, after you have been there a week, you won't be the same woman." "That's it," cried Nanny with sudden passion. "Nah, I'll be a woman on the poor's rates. Oh, mither, you little thought when you bore me that I would come to this." "Nanny," the doctor said, rising again, "I am ashamed of you." "I humbly spare you forgiveness, sir," she said, "and you might bide just a wee yet. I've been ready to gang these 2 hours, but now that the machine is at the gate, I dinna ken how it is, but I'm terrible sweer to come away. Oh, Mr. Dishart, it's right true what the doctor says about the place, but I canna just take it in. I'm gey old." "You will often get out to see your friends," was all Gavin could say. Nah, she cried. "Dinna say that. I'll gang, but you mauna bid me ever come out, except in a hearse. Dinna let anybody in Thrums look on my face again." "We must go," said the doctor firmly. "Put on your mutch, Nanny." "I dinna need to put on a mutch," she answered, with a taint flush of pride. "I have a bonnet." She took the bonnet from her bed and put it on slowly. "Are you sure there's nobody looking?" she asked. The doctor glanced at the minister, and Gavin rose. "Let us pray," he said, and the three went down on their knees. It was not the custom of Auld Licht ministers to leave any house without offering up a prayer in it, and to us it always seemed that when Gavin prayed, he was at the knees of God. The little minister pouring himself out in prayer in a humble room, with odd people around him who knew much more of the world than he, his voice at times thick and again a squeal, and his hands clasped, not gracefully, may have been only a comic figure, but we were old-fashioned, and he seemed to make us better men. If I only knew the way, I would draw him as he was, and not fear to make him too mean a man for you to read about. He had not been long in Thrums before he knew that we talked much of his prayers, and that doubtless puffed him up a little. Sometimes, I dare say, he rose from his knees, feeling that he had prayed well today, which is a dreadful charge to bring against anyone. But it was not always so, nor was it so now. I am not speaking harshly of this man, whom I have loved beyond all others, when I say that Nanny came between him and his prayer. Had he been of God's own image, unstained, he would have forgotten all else in his Maker's presence, but Nanny was speaking too, and her words choked his. At first she only whispered, but soon what was eating her heart burst out painfully, and she did not know that the minister had stopped. They were such moans as these that brought him back to earth. "I'll hae to gang. I'm a base woman no to be mair thankful than them that is so good to me. I dinna like to prig with them, to take a roundabout road, and I'm sair fleed a' the Roods will see me. If it could just be said to poor Sanders, when he comes back, that I died hurriedly, syne he would be able to haud up his head. Oh, mither, I wish terrible that they had come and taken me at night. It's a dog cart, and I was praying it might be a cart, so that they would cover me up with straw." "This is more than I can stand," the doctor cried. Nanny rose, frightened. "I've tried you, sir," she said, "but oh, I'm grateful, and I'm ready now." They all advanced toward the door without another word, and Nanny even tried to smile. But in the middle of the floor something came over her, and she stood there. Gavin took her hand, and it was cold. She looked from one to the other, her mouth opening and shutting. "I can't help it," she said. "It's cruel hard," muttered the doctor. "I knew this woman when she was a lassie." The little minister stretched out his hands. "Have pity on her, O God," he prayed, with the presumptuousness of youth. Nanny heard the words. "O God," she cried, "you might." God needs no minister to tell him what to do, but it was his will that the poorhouse should not have this woman. He made use of a strange instrument, no other than the Egyptian, who now opened the mud-house door. End of chapter 12.
Chapter 13 of The Little Minister. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. The Little Minister by J. M. Barrie. Chapter 13. Second Coming of the Egyptian Woman. The gypsy had been passing the house, perhaps on her way to Thrums for gossip, and it was only curiosity, born suddenly of Gavin's cry, that made her enter. On finding herself in unexpected company, she retained hold of the door, and to the amazed minister she seemed for a moment to have stepped into the mud house from his garden. Her eyes danced, however, as they recognized him, and then he hardened. "This is no place for you," he was saying fiercely, when Nanny, too distraught to think, fell crying at the Egyptian's feet. "They're taking me to the poorhouse," she sobbed. "Dinna let them, dinna let them." The Egyptian's arms clasped her, and the Egyptian kissed the sallow cheek that had once been as fair as yours, madam, who may read this story. No one had caressed Nanny for many years, but do you think she was too poor and old to care for these young arms around her neck? There are those who say that women cannot love each other, but it is not true. Woman is not undeveloped man, but something better, and Gavin and the doctor knew it as they saw Nanny clinging to her protector. When the gypsy turned with flashing eyes to the two men, she might have been a mother guarding her child. "How dare you?" she cried, stamping her foot, and they quaked like malefactors. "You don't see," Gavin began, but her indignation stopped him. "You coward!" she said. Even the doctor had been impressed, so that he now addressed the gypsy respectfully. "This is all very well," he said, "but a woman's sympathy—" "A woman! If I could be a man for only 5 minutes." She clenched her little fists and again turned to Nanny. "You poor dear," she said tenderly. "I won't let them take you away." She looked triumphantly at both minister and doctor, as one who had foiled them in their cruel designs. "Go," she said, pointing grandly to the door. "Is this the Egyptian of the riots?" the doctor said in a low voice to Gavin. "Or is she a queen? Hoots, man, don't look so shamefaced. We're not criminals. Say something." Then to the Egyptian Gavin said firmly, "You mean well, but you are doing this poor woman a cruelty in holding out hopes to her that cannot be realized. Sympathy is not meal and bedclothes, and these are what she needs." "And you, who live in luxury," retorted the girl, "would send her to the poorhouse for them. I thought better of you." "Tuts," said the doctor, losing patience. "Mr. Dishart gives more than any other man in Thrums to the poor, and he is not to be preached to by a gypsy. We are waiting for you, Nanny." "Ay, I'm coming," said Nanny, leaving the Egyptian. "I hae to gang, lassie. Dinna greet for me." But the Egyptian said, "No, you're not going. It is these men who are going. Go, sirs, and leave us." "And will you provide for Nanny?" asked the doctor contemptuously. "Yes." "And where is the siller to come from?" "That's my affair and Nanny's. Begone, both of you. She shall never want again. See how the very mention of your going brings back life to her face." "I won't be gone," the doctor said roughly, "till I see the colour of your siller." "Oh, the money," said the Egyptian scornfully. She put her hand into her pocket confidently, as if used to well-filled purses, but could only draw out 2 silver pieces. "I had forgotten," she said aloud, though speaking to herself. "I thought so," said the cynical doctor. "Come, Nanny." "You presume to doubt me?" the Egyptian said, blocking his way to the door. "How could I presume to believe you?" he answered. "You are a beggar by profession, and yet talk as if — pooh, nonsense." "I would live on terrible little," Nanny whispered, "and Sanders will be out again in August month." 7 shillings a week," rapped out the doctor. "Is that all?" the Egyptian asked. "She shall have it then." "When?" "At once. No, it is not possible to night, but to morrow I will bring £5. No, I will send it. No, you must come for it." "And where, O daughter of Dives, do you reside?" the doctor asked. No doubt the Egyptian could have found a ready answer had her pity for Nanny been less sincere. As it was, she hesitated, waiting to propitiate the doctor, while holding her secret fast. "I only asked," McQueen said, eyeing her curiously, "because when I make an appointment I like to know where it is to be held." But I suppose you are to rise out of the ground as you have done today, and did 6 weeks ago." "Whether I rise out of the ground or not," the gypsy said, keeping her temper with an effort, "there will be a £5 note in my hand. You will meet me to morrow about this hour at say the Chimes of Cushy." "No," said the doctor, after a moment's pause, "I won't. Even if I went to the Chimes I should not find you there. Why can you not come to me?" "Why do you carry a woman's hair," replied the Egyptian, "in that locket on your chain?" Whether she was speaking of what she knew, or this was only a chance shot, I cannot tell, but the doctor stepped back from her hastily, and could not help looking down at the locket. "Yes," said the Egyptian, calmly, "it is still shut. But why do you sometimes open it at nights?" "Lassie," the old doctor cried, "are you a witch?" "Perhaps," she said, "but I ask for no answer to my questions. If you have your secrets, why may I not have mine? Now, will you meet me at the Chimes?" "No, I distrust you more than ever. Even if you came, it would be to play with me, as you have done already. How can a vagrant have £5 in her pocket when she does not have 5 shillings on her back?" "You are a cruel, hard man," the Egyptian said, beginning to lose hope. "But see," she cried, brightening, "look at this ring. Do you know its value?" She held up her finger, but the stone would not live in the dull light. "I see it is gold," the doctor said cautiously, and she smiled at the ignorance that made him look only at the frame. "Certainly it is gold," said Gavin, equally stupid. "Mercy on us," Nanny cried. "I believe it's what they call a diamond." "How did you come by it?" the doctor asked suspiciously. "I thought we had agreed not to ask each other questions," the Egyptian answered dryly. "But see, I will give it to you to hold in hostage. If I am not at the Chimes to get it back, you can keep it." The doctor took the ring in his hand and examined it curiously. "There is a quirk in this," he said at last, "that I don't like. Take back your ring, lassie. Mr. Dishart, give Nanny your arm, and I'll carry her box to the machine." Now, all this time Gavin had been in the dire distress of a man possessed of two minds, of which one said, "This is a true woman," and the other, "Remember the 17th of October." They were at war within him, and he knew that he must take a side. Yet no sooner had he cast one out than he invited it back. He did not answer the doctor. "Unless," McQueen said, nettled by his hesitation, "you trust this woman's word." Gavin tried honestly to weigh those two minds against each other, but could not prevent impulse jumping into one of the scales. "You do trust me," said the Egyptian, with wet eyes, and now that he looked on her again. "Yes," he said firmly, "I trust you." And the words that had been so difficult to say were the right words. He had no more doubt of it. "Just think a moment first," the doctor warned him. "I decline to have anything to do with this matter. You will go to the Chimes for the siller?" "If it is necessary," said Gavin. "It is necessary," the Egyptian said. "Then I will go." Nanny took his hand timidly, and would have kissed it had he been less than a minister. "You dare not, man," the doctor said gruffly, "make an appointment with this gypsy. Think of what will be said in Thrums." I honour Gavin for the way in which he took this warning. For him, who was watched from the rising of his congregation to their lying down, whose every movement was expected to be a text to Thrums, it was no small thing that he had promised. This he knew, but he only reddened because the doctor had implied an offensive thing in a woman's presence. "You forget yourself, doctor," he said sharply. "Send someone in your place," advised the doctor, who liked the little minister. "He must come himself and alone," said the Egyptian. "You must both give me your promise not to mention who is Nanny's friend, and she must promise too." "Well," said the doctor, buttoning up his coat, "I cannot keep my horse freezing any longer. Remember, Mr. Dishart, you take the sole responsibility of this." "I do," said Gavin, and with the utmost confidence. "Give him the ring then, lassie," said McQueen. She handed the minister the ring, but he would not take it. "I have your word," he said. "That is sufficient." Then the Egyptian gave him the first look that he could think of afterwards without misgivings. "So be it," said the doctor. "Get the money, and I will say nothing about it, unless I have reason to think that it has been dishonestly come by. Don't look so frightened at me, Nanny. I hope for your sake that her stocking foot is full of gold." "Surely it's worth risking," Nanny said, not very brightly, "when the minister's on her side." "Ay, but on whose side, Nanny?" asked the doctor. "Lassie, I bear you no grudge. Will you not tell me who you are?" Only a poor gypsy, your honour," said the girl, becoming mischievous now that she had gained her point. "Only a wandering Holland shaker. And will I tell you your fortune, my pretty gentleman?" "No, you shan't," replied the doctor, plunging his hands so hastily into his pockets that Gavin laughed. "I don't need to look at your hand," said the gypsy. "I can read your fortune in your face." She looked at him fixedly, so that he fidgeted. "I see you," said the Egyptian in a sepulchral voice, and speaking slowly, "become very frail. Your eyesight has almost gone. You are sitting alone in a cold room, cooking your own dinner over a feeble fire. The soot is falling down the lum. Your bearish manners towards women have driven the servant lassie frae your house, and your wife beats you." "Ay, you spoil your prophecy there," the doctor said, considerably relieved, "for I'm not married. My pipe's the only wife I ever had." "You will be married by that time," continued the Egyptian, frowning at this interruption, "for I see your wife. She is a shrew. She marries you in your dotage. She laughs at you in company. She does not allow you to smoke." "Away with you, you jade!" cried the doctor in a fury, and feeling nervously for his pipe. "Mr. Dishart, you had better stay and arrange this matter as you choose, but I want a word with you outside." "And you're no angry with me, doctor, are you?" asked Nanny wistfully. "You've been right good to me, but I canna thole the thought of that place. And oh, doctor, you winna tell naebody that I was so near tying to it?" In the garden McQueen said to Gavin, "You may be right, Mr. Dishart, in this matter, for there is this in our favour, that the woman can gain nothing by tricking us. She did seem to feel for Nanny. But who can she be? You saw she could put off and on the Scotch tongue as easily as if it were a cap." "She is as much a mystery to me as to you," Gavin answered, "but she will give me the money, and that is all I ask of her." "Ay, that remains to be seen. But take care of yourself. A man's second childhood begins when a woman gets hold of him. Don't alarm yourself about me, doctor. I dare say she is only one of those gypsies from the south. They are said to be wealthy, many of them, and even, when they like, to have a grand manner. The Thrums people had no doubt but that she was what she seemed to be." "Ay, but what does she seem to be? Even that puzzles me. And then there is this mystery about her which she admits herself, though perhaps only to play with us." "Perhaps," said Gavin. "She is only taking precautions against her discovery by the police. You must remember her part in the riots." "Yes, but we never learned how she was able to play that part. Besides, there is no fear in her, or she would not have ventured back to Thrums. However, good luck attend you, but be wary. You saw how she kept her feet among her shalls and wills. Never trust a Scotch man or woman who does not come to grief among them." The doctor took his seat in the dog cart. "And Mr. Dishart," he called out, "that was all nonsense about the locket." End of chapter 13. Recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. Chapter 14 of The Little Minister. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. The Little Minister by J.M. Barrie. Chapter 14. The minister dances to the woman's piping. Gavin let the doctor's warnings fall on the grass. In his joy over Nanny's deliverance, he jumped the garden gate, whose hinges were of yarn, and cleverly caught his hat as it was leaving his head in protest. He then re-entered the mud house staidly. Pleasant was the change. Nanny's home was as a clock that had been run out, and is set going again. Already the old woman was unpacking her box to increase the distance between herself and the poorhouse, but Gavin only saw her in the background, for the Egyptian, singing at her work, had become the heart of the house. She had flung her shawl over Nanny's shoulders, and was at the fireplace breaking peat with the leg of a stool. She turned merrily to the minister to ask him to chop up his staff for firewood, and he would have answered wittily, but could not. Then, as often, the beauty of the Egyptian surprised him into silence. I could never get used to her face myself in the after days. It has always held me wondering, like my own Glen Quharity on a summer day, when the sun is lingering and the clouds are on the march, and the glen is never the same for 2 minutes, but always so beautiful as to make me sad. Never will I attempt to picture the Egyptian as she seemed to Gavin while she bent over Nanny's fire. Never will I describe my Glen. Yet 100 times have I hankered after trying to picture both. An older minister, believing that Nanny's anguish was ended, might have gone on his knees and finished the interrupted prayer. But now Gavin was only doing this girl's bidding. "Nanny and I are having a dish of tea as soon as we have things set to rights," she told him. "Do you think we should invite the minister, Nanny?" "We couldn't dare," Nanny answered quickly. "You'll excuse her, Mr. Dishart, for the presumption." "Presumption," said the Egyptian, making a face. "Lassie," Nanny said, fearful to offend her new friend, yet horrified at this affront to the minister, "I ken you mean weel, but Mr. Dishart, I think you're putting yoursel' on an equality with him," she added in a whisper. "Dinna be so free. He's the elect minister." The gypsy bowed with mock awe, but Gavin let it pass. He had indeed forgotten that he was anybody in particular, and was anxious to stay to tea. "But there is no water," he remembered, "and is there any tea?" "I am going out for them and for some other things," the Egyptian explained. "But no," she continued reflectively, "if I go for the tea, you must go for the water." "Lassie," cried Nanny, "mind wha you're speaking to send a minister to the well." "I will go," said Gavin, recklessly lifting the pitcher. "The well is in the wood, I think." "Gie me the pitcher, Mr. Dishart," said Nanny in distress. "What a town there would be if you was seen wi't." "Then he must remain here and keep the house till we come back," said the Egyptian, and thereupon departed, with a friendly wave of her hand to the minister. "She's an awful lassie," Nanny said apologetically, "but it'll just be the way she has been brought up." "She has been very good to you, Nanny." "She has. Leastwise, she promises to be. Mr. Dishart, she's awa. What if she does not come back?" Nanny spoke nervously, and Gavin drew a long face. "I think she will," he said faintly. "I'm confident of it," he added in the same voice. "And has she the siller?" "I believe in her," said Gavin, so doggedly that his own words reassured him. "She has an excellent heart." "Ay," said Nanny, to whom the minister's faith was more than the Egyptian's promise, "and that's hardly natural in a gaen aboot body. Yet a gypsy she maun be, for naebody would pretend to be ane that wasna. That she proved was an Egyptian by dauring to send you to the well." This conclusive argument brought her prospective dower so close to Nanny's eyes that it hid the poorhouse. "I suppose she'll gie you the money," she said, "and syne you'll gie me the 7 shillings a week." "That seems the best plan," Gavin answered. "And what will you gie it me in?" Nanny asked, with something on her mind. "I would be terrible obliged if you gie it to me in saxpences." "Do the smaller coins go farther?" Gavin asked curiously. "Na, it's no that. But I've heard tell of folk giving away half crowns by mistake for 2 shilling bits. Ay, and there's something dizzying in haeing 24 pennies in one piece. It has sic a terrible little bulk. Sanders had aince a gold sovereign, and he looked at it so often that it seemed to grow smaller and smaller in his hands, till he was feared it micht just be a half after all." Her mind relieved on this matter, the old woman set off for the well. A minute afterwards Gavin went to the door to look for the gypsy, and behold, Nanny was no further than the gate. Have you who read ever been sick near to death, and then so far recovered that you could once again stand at your window? If so, you have not forgotten how the beauty of the world struck you afresh, so that you looked long and said many times, "How fair a world it is," like one who had made a discovery. It was such a look that Nanny gave to the hill and the Caddam while she stood at her garden gate. Gavin returned to the fire and watched a girl in it in an officer's cloak, playing at hide and seek with soldiers. After a time he sighed, then looked round sharply to see who had sighed, then absent-mindedly lifted the empty kettle and placed it on the glowing peats. He was standing glaring at the kettle, his arms folded, when Nanny returned from the well. "I've been thinking," she said, "o' something that proves the lassie to be just an Egyptian. Ay, I noticed she wasna nane odd when I said you was the auld licht minister. Weel, I'se uphaud that came frae her living over muckle in the open air. Is there no smell of burning in the house?" "I have noticed it," Gavin answered, sniffing, "since you came in. I was busy until then putting on the kettle. The smell is becoming worse." Nanny had seen the empty kettle on the fire as he began to speak, and so solved the mystery. Her first thought was to snatch the kettle out of the blaze, but remembering who had put it there, she dared not. She sidled toward the hearth instead, and saying craftily, "Ay, here it is. It's a clout among the peats," softly laid the kettle on the earthen floor. It was still red with sparks, however, when the gypsy reappeared. "Who burned the kettle?" she asked, ignoring Nanny's signs. "Lassie," Nanny said, it was me." But Gavin, flushing, confessed his guilt. "Oh, you stupid!" exclaimed the Egyptian, shaking her 2 ounces of tea, which then cost 6 shillings the pound, in his face. At this Nanny wrung her hands, crying, "That's waur than swearing." "If men," said the gypsy severely, "would keep their hands in their pockets all day, the world's affairs would be more easily managed." "Wheesht," cried Nanny, "if Mr. Dishart cared to set his mind to it, he could make the kettle boil quicker than you or me, but his thochts is on higher things." "No higher than this," retorted the gypsy, holding her hand level with her brow. "Confess, Mr. Dishart, that this is the exact height of what you were thinking about. See, Nanny, he is blushing as if I meant that he had been thinking about me. He cannot answer, Nanny." "And kindly of him it is no to answer," said Nanny, who had been examining the gypsy's various purchases. "For what could he answer except that he would need to be sure of living 1,000 years afore he could spare 5 minutes on you or me? Of course it would be different if we sat under him." "And yet," said the Egyptian, with great solemnity, "he is to drink tea at that very table. I hope you are sensible of the honour, Nanny." "Am I no?" said Nanny, whose education had not included sarcasm. "I'm trying to keep frae thinking o't till he's gone, in case I should let the teapot fall." "You have nothing to thank me for, Nanny," said Gavin, "but much for which to thank this haggerty-taggerty Egyptian," suggested the girl. Then, looking at Gavin curiously, she said, "But my name is Babbie." "That's short for Barbara," said Nanny, "but Babbie what?" "Yes, Babbie Watt," replied the gypsy, as if one name were as good as another. "Weel, then lift the lid off the kettle, Babbie," said Nanny, "for it's boiling ower." Gavin looked at Nanny with admiration and envy, for she had said Babbie as coolly as if it was the name of a pepper box. Babbie tucked up her sleeves to wash Nanny's cups and saucers, which even in the most prosperous days of the mud house had only been in use once a week, and Gavin was so eager to help that he bumped his head on the plate rack. "Sit there," said Babbie, authoritatively pointing with a cup in her hand to a stool, "and don't rise till I give you permission." To Nanny's amazement he did as he was bid. "I got the things in the little shop you told me of," the Egyptian continued, addressing the mistress of the house, "but the horrid man would not give them to me until he had seen my money." "Enoch would be suspicious of you," Nanny explained, "you being an Egyptian." "Ah," said Babbie, with a side glance at the minister, "I am only an Egyptian. Is that why you dislike me, Mr. Dishart?" Gavin hesitated foolishly over his answer, and the Egyptian, with the towel round her waist, made a pretty gesture of despair. "He neither likes you nor dislikes you," Nanny explained. "You forget he's a minister." "That is what I cannot endure," said Babbie, putting the towel to her eyes, "to be neither liked or disliked. Please hate me, Mr. Dishart, if you cannot love me." Her face was behind the towel, and Gavin could not decide whether it was the face or the towel that shook with agitation. He gave Nanny a look that asked, "Is she really crying?" And Nanny telegraphed back, "I question it." "Come, come," said the minister gallantly, "I did not say that I disliked you." Even this desperate compliment had not the desired effect, for the gypsy continued to sob behind her screen. "I can honestly say," went on Gavin, as solemnly as if he were making a statement in a court of justice, "that I like you." Then the Egyptian let drop her towel, and replied with equal solemnity, "Oh, thank you, Nanny. The minister says me is a too ittle tirl." "He didna ging that length," said Nanny sharply, to cover Gavin's confusion. "Set the things, Babbie, and I'll make tea." The Egyptian obeyed demurely, pretending to wipe her eyes every time Gavin looked at her. He frowned at this, and then she affected to be too overcome to go on with her work. "Tell me, Nanny, what sort of man this Enoch is, from whom I bought the things." "He is not very regular, I fear," answered Gavin, who felt that he had sat silent and self-conscious on his stool too long. "Do you mean that he drinks?" asked Babbie. "No, I mean regular in his attendance." The Egyptian's face showed no enlightenment. "His attendance at church," Gavin explained. "He's far frae it," said Nanny, "and as a body kens, Joe Cruikshanks, the atheist, has the wyte o' that. The scoundrel told Enoch that the great ministers in Edinburgh and London believed in no hell except sic as your ain conscience made for you. and ever since St. Enoch has been careless about the future state." "Ah," said Babbie, waving the church aside, "what I want to know is whether he is a single man." "He is not," Gavin replied, "but why do you want to know that?" "Because single men are such gossips. I'm sorry he is not single, as I want him to repeat to everybody what I told him." "Trust him to tell Susy," said Nanny, "and Susy to tell the town." "His wife is a gossip?" "Ay, she's aye tonguing, especially about her teeth. There are folk wi' siller, and she has a set of false teeth. It's fair scum fishing to hear her blawing about thae teeth. She's so fleid we dinna ken that they're false." Nanny had spoken jealously, but suddenly she trembled with apprehension. "Babbie," she cried, "you didna speak about the poorhouse to Enoch." The Egyptian shook her head, though of the poorhouse she had been forced to speak, for Enoch, having seen the doctor going home alone, insisted on knowing why. "But I knew," the gypsy said, "that the Thrums people would be very unhappy until they discovered where you get the money I am giving you, and as that is a secret, I hinted to Enoch that your benefactor is Mr. Dishart." "You should not have said that," interposed Gavin. "I cannot foster such a deception." "They will foster it without your help," the Egyptian said. "Besides, if you choose, you can say you get the money from a friend." "Ay, you can say that," Nanny entreated, with such eagerness that Babbie remarked a little bitterly, "There's no fear of Nanny's telling anyone that the friend is a gypsy girl." No," agreed Nanny, again losing Babbie's sarcasm. "I winna let on. It's so queer to be befriended by an Egyptian." "It is scarcely respectable," Babbie said. "It's no," answered simple Nanny. I suppose Nanny's unintentional cruelty did hurt Babbie as much as Gavin thought. She winced, and her face had two expressions, the one cynical, the other pained. Her mouth curled as if to tell the minister that gratitude was nothing to her, but her eyes had to struggle to keep back a tear. Gavin was touched, and she saw it, and for a moment they were two people who understood each other. "I, at least," Gavin said in a low voice, "will know who is the benefactress, and think none the worse of her because she is a gypsy." At this Babbie smiled gratefully to him, and then both laughed, for they had heard Nanny remarking to the kettle, "But I wouldna have been nane angry if she had telled Enoch that the minister was to take his tea here. Susy'll no believe, though I tell her, as tell her I will." To Nanny the table now presented a rich appearance, for besides the teapot there were butter, a loaf bread, and cheesies, a biscuit of which only Thrums knows the secret. "Draw in your chair, Mr. Dishart," she said in suppressed excitement. "Yes," said Babbie, "you take this chair, Mr. Dishart, and Nanny will have that one, and I can sit humbly on the stool." But Nanny held up her hands in horror. "Keep us aye," she exclaimed. "The lassie thinks her and me is to sit down with the minister. We're no to gang that length, Babbie. We're just to stand and serve him, and syne we'll sit down when he has risen." "Delightful," said Babbie, clapping her hands. "Nanny, you kneel on that side of him, and I will kneel on this. You will hold the butter, and I the biscuits." But Gavin, as this girl was always forgetting, was a lord of creation. "Sit down, both of you at once," he thundered. "I command you." Then the two women fell into their seats, Nanny in terror, Babbie affecting it. End of chapter 14. Recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. Chapter 15 of The Little Minister. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. The Little Minister by J. M. Barrie. Chapter 15. The Minister Bewitched. Second Sermon against Women. To Nanny it was a dizzying experience to sit at the head of her own table, and, with assumed calmness, invite the minister not to spare the loaf bread. Babbie's prattle and even Gavin's answers were but an indistinct noise to her, to be as little regarded in the excitement of watching whether Mr. Dishart noticed that there was a knife for the butter, as the music of the river by a man who was catching trout. Every time Gavin's cup went to his lips, Nanny calculated, correctly, how much he had drunk, and yet, when the right moment arrived, she asked in the English voice that is fashionable at ceremonies if his cup was toom. Perhaps it was well that Nanny had these matters to engross her, for though Gavin spoke freely, he was saying nothing of lasting value, and some of his remarks to the Egyptian if preserved for the calmer contemplation of the morrow, might have seemed frivolous to himself. Usually his observations were scrambled for, like halfpence at a wedding, but today they were only for one person. Infected by the Egyptian's high spirits, Gavin had laid aside the minister with his hat, and what was left was only a young man. He who had stamped his feet at the thought of a soldier's cloak now wanted to be reminded of it. The little minister, who used to address himself in terms of scorn every time he wasted an hour, was at present dallying with a teaspoon, even laughed boisterously, flinging back his head, and little knew that behind Nanny's smiling face was a terrible dread, because his chair had once given way before. Even though our thoughts are not with our company, the mention of our name is a bell to which we usually answer. Hearing hers, Nanny started. "You can tell me, Nanny," the Egyptian had said, with an arch look at the minister. "Oh, Nanny, for shame! How can you expect to follow our conversation when you only listen to Mr. Dishart?" "She is saying, Nanny," Gavin broke in almost gaily for a minister, "that she saw me recently wearing a cloak. You know I have no such thing." "Na," Nanny answered artlessly, "you had just a thin brown coat with a braid around it, forby the ane you have on the now." "You see," Gavin said to Babbie, "I could not have a new neckcloth, not to speak of a cloak, without everybody in Thrums knowing about it. I dare say Nanny knows all about the braid, and even what it cost." "3 bawbees the yard at Colwowie's shop," replied Nanny promptly, "and your mother sewed it on. Sam'l Fairweather has the marrows on his topcoat, not that it has the same look on him." "Nevertheless," Babbie persisted, "I am sure the minister has a cloak, but perhaps he is ashamed of it. No doubt it is hidden away in the garret." "Na, we would hae kent of it. It was there," said Nanny. "But it may be in a chest, and the chest may be locked," the Egyptian suggested. "Ay, but the kist in the garret isna locked," Nanny answered. "How do you get to know all these things, Nanny?" asked Gavin, sighing. "Your congregation tells me naebody would lay by news about a minister." "But how do they know?" "I dinna ken. They just find out, 'cause they're so fond o' you." "I hope they never become so fond of me as that," said Babbie. "Still, Nanny, the minister's cloak is hidden somewhere." "Losh, what would make him hod it?" demanded the old woman. "Folk that has cloaks doesna bury them in boxes." At the word bury, Gavin's hand fell on the table, and he returned to Nanny apprehensively. "That would depend on how the cloak was got," said the cruel Egyptian. "If it was not his own—" "Lassie," cried Nanny, "behave yourself." "Or if he found it in his possession against his will," suggested Gavin slyly. "He might have got it from some one who picked it up cheap." "From his wife, for instance," said Babbie, whereupon Gavin suddenly became interested in the floor. Ay, the minister was hitting at you there, Babbie," Nanny explained, "for the way you made up with the captain's cloak. The Thrums folk wondered less at your taking it than at your no keeping it. It's said to be michty grand." "It was rather like the one the minister's wife gave him," said Babbie. "The minister has neither a wife nor a cloak," retorted Nanny. "He isn't married?" asked Babbie, the picture of incredulity. Nanny gathered from the minister's face that he deputed her the task of enlightening this ignorant girl, so she replied with emphasis, "Na, they hinna got him yet, and I'm cheated of it doesna take them all their time." Thus do the best of women sell their sex for nothing. "I did wonder," said the Egyptian gravely, "at any mere woman's daring to marry such a minister." "Ay," replied Nanny spiritedly, "but there's daring limmers wherever there's a single man." "So I have often suspected," said Babbie, duly shocked. "But, Nanny, I was told the minister had a wife by one who said he saw her." "He lied then," answered Nanny, turning to Gavin for further instructions. "But see, the minister does not deny the horrid charge himself." "No, and for a reason he didna deny the cloak, because it's no worth his while. I'll tell you what your friend has seen. It will be somebody that would like to be Mrs. Dishart. There's a hantle o' that kind. Ay, lassie, but wishing winna land a woman in a manse." "It was one of the soldiers," Babbie said, "who told me about her. He said Mr. Dishart introduced her to him." "Sojers!" cried Nanny. "I could never thole the name o' them. Sanders in his young days hankered after joining them, and so he would if it hadna been for the fechting. Ay, and now they tying him away to the gaol, and swearing lies about him. Dinna put any faith in sojers, lassie." I was told, Babbie went on, that the minister's wife was rather like me. Heaven forbid! Ejaculated Nanny so fervently that all three suddenly sat back from the table. I'm no meaning, Nanny continued hurriedly, fearing to offend her benefactress, but what you're the bonniest tid I ever saw out an almanac. But you would ken Mr. Dishart's contempt for bonny faces if you had heard his sermon against them. I didna hear it myself, for I'm no auld licht, but it did the work o' the town for 8 days. If Nanny had not taken her eyes off Gavin for the moment, she would have known that he was now anxious to change the topic. Babbie saw it and became suspicious. When did he preach against the wiles of women, Nanny? It was long ago, said Gavin hastily. Not so very lang syne, corrected Nanny. It was the Sabbath after the soldiers was in Thrums, the day you changed your text so hurriedly. Some thocht you wasna weel, but lang Thomas Wamond is too officious, Gavin said with dignity. I forbid you, Nanny, to repeat his story. But what made you change your text? Asked Babbie. You see, he winna tell, Nanny said wistfully. I dinna deny, but I would like reet to ken, but the session's as puzzled as yourself, Babbie. Perhaps more puzzled, answered the Egyptian with a smile that challenged Gavin's frowns to combat and overthrow them. What surprises me, Mr. Dishart, is that such a great man can stoop to see whether women are pretty or not. It was very good of you to remember me today. I suppose you recognize me by my frock? By your face, he replied boldly. By your eyes. Nanny, exclaimed the Egyptian, did you hear what the minister said? Who's me, answered Nanny. I missed it. He says he would know me anywhere by my eyes. So would I myself, said Nanny. Then what colour are they, Mr. Dishart? Demanded Babbie. Don't speak, Nanny, for I want to expose him. She closed her eyes tightly. Gavin was in a quandary. I suppose he had looked at her eyes too long to know much about them. Blue, he guessed at last. They're black, said Nanny, who had doubtless known this for an hour. I am always marvelling over the cleverness of women, as everyone must see who reads this story. No, but what they micht be blue in some licks, Nanny added, out of respect to the minister. Oh, don't defend him, Nanny, said Babbie, looking reproachfully at Gavin. I don't see that any minister has a right to denounce women when he is so ignorant of his subject. I will say it, Nanny, and you need not kick me beneath the table. Was not all this intoxicating to the little minister, who had never till now met a girl on equal terms? At 21 a man is a musical instrument given to the other sex, but it is not as instruments learned at school, for when she sits down to it she cannot tell what tune she is about to play. That is because she has no notion of what the instrument is capable. Babbie's kind-heartedness, her gaiety, her coquetry, her moments of sadness had been a witch's fingers, and Gavin was still trembling under their touch. Even in being taken to task by her there was a charm, for every pout of her mouth, every shake of her head said, "You like me, and therefore you have given me the right to tease you." Men sign these agreements without reading them, but indeed a man is a stupid animal at the best, and thinks all his life that he did not propose until he blurted out, "I love you." It was later than it should have been when the minister left the mud house, but even then he only put on his hat because Babbie said that she must go. "But not your way," she added. "I go into the wood and vanish. You know, Nanny, I live up a tree." "Dinna say that," said Nanny anxiously, "or I'll be fleid about the siller." "Don't fear about it. Mr. Dishart will get some of it tomorrow at the Kaims. I would bring it here, but I cannot come so far tomorrow." "Then I'll hae peace to the end of my days," said the old woman. "And Babbie, I wish the same to you with all my heart." Babbie replied mournfully, "I have read my fortune, Nanny, and there is not much happiness in it." "I hope that is not true," Gavin said simply. They were standing at the door, and she was looking toward the hill, perhaps without seeing it. All at once it came to Gavin that this fragile girl might have a history far sadder and more turbulent than his. "Do you really care?" she asked, without looking at him. "Yes," he said stoutly, "I care." "Because you do not know me," she said. "Because I do know you," he answered. Now she did look at him. "I believe," she said, making a discovery, "that you misunderstand me less than those who have known me longer." This was a perilous confidence, for it at once made Gavin say, "Babbie." She answered frankly. I'm glad to hear that. I thought you did not really like me because you never called me by my name." Gavin drew a great breath. "That was not the reason," he said. The reason was now unmistakable. "I was wrong," said the Egyptian, a little alarmed. You do not understand me at all." She returned to Nanny, and Gavin set off, holding his head high, his brains in a whirl. 5 minutes afterwards, when Nanny was at the fire, the diamond ring on her little finger, he came back, looking like one who had just seen sudden death. "I had forgotten," he said, with a fierceness aimed at himself, "that tomorrow is the Sabbath." "Need that make any difference?" asked the gypsy. "At this hour on Monday," said Gavin, hoarsely, "I will be at the Kaims." He went away without another word, and Babbie watched him from the window. Nanny had not looked up from the ring. "What a pity he is a minister," the girl said, reflectively. "Nanny, you're not listening." The old woman was making the ring flash by the light of the fire. "Nanny, do you hear me? Did you see Mr. Dishart come back?" "I heard the door open," Nanny answered, without taking her greedy eyes off the ring. "Was it him? Whaur did you get his lassie?" "Give it me back, Nanny. I am going now." But Nanny did not give it back. She put her other hand over it to guard it, and there she crouched, warming herself not at the fire, but at the ring. "Give it me, Nanny." "It wouldna come off my finger." She gloated over it, nursed it, kissed it. "I must have it, Nanny." The Egyptian put her hand lightly on the old woman's shoulder, and Nanny jumped up, pressing the ring to her bosom. Her face had become cunning and ugly. She retreated into a corner. "Nanny, give me back my ring, or I will take it from you." The cruel light of the diamond was in Nanny's eyes for a moment, and then, shuddering, she said, "Tak your ring away. Take it out of my sight." In the meantime, Gavin was trudging home gloomily, composing his second sermon against women. I have already given the entry in my own diary for that day. This is his. Notes on Jonah, exchanged volume 43, European magazine for Owens' justification, per flying stationer. Began 2 Samuel, visited Nanny Webster. There is no mention of the Egyptian. End of chapter 15. Recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. Chapter 16 of The Little Minister. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. The Little Minister by J. M. Barrie. Chapter 16. Continued misbehavior of the Egyptian woman. By the following Monday it was known in many looms that something sat heavily on the Auld Licht minister's mind. On the previous day he had preached his second sermon of warning to susceptible young men, and his first mention of the word woman had blown even the sleepy heads upright. Now he had salt fish for breakfast, and on clearing the table Jean noticed that his knife and fork were uncrossed. He was observed walking into a gooseberry bush by Susy Lynn, who possessed the pioneer spring bed of Thrums, and always knew when her man jumped into it by suddenly finding herself shot to the ceiling. Lunan, the tinsmith, and 2 women, who had the luck to be in the street at the time, saw him stopping at Dr. McQueen's door as if about to knock, and then turning smartly away. His hat blew off in the school wynd, where a wind wanders ever, looking for hats, and he chased it so passionately that Lang Tammas went into Allardyce's smithy to say, "I dinna like it." Of course he couldna afford to lose his hat, but he should hae run after it mair reverently. Gavin indeed was troubled. He had avoided speaking of the Egyptian to his mother. He had gone to McQueen's house to ask the doctor to accompany him to the Kaims, but with the knocker in his hand he changed his mind, and now he was at the place of meeting alone. It was a day of thaw, nothing to be heard from a distance but the swish of curling stones through water on Rashie Bog, where the match for the eldership was going on. Around him Gavin saw only dejected firs, with drops of water falling listlessly from them, clods of snow, and grass that rustled as if animals were crawling through it. All the roads were slack. I suppose no young man to whom society has not become a cheap thing can be in Gavin's position, awaiting the coming of an attractive girl, without giving thought to what he should say to her. When in the pulpit or visiting the sick, words came in a rush to the little minister, but he had to set his teeth to determine what to say to the Egyptian. This was because he had not yet decided which of the two women she was. Hardly had he started on one line of thought when she crossed in his vision in a new light and drew him after her. Her "Need that make any difference?" sang in his ear like another divot, cast this time at religion itself. And now he spoke aloud, pointing his finger at the fir. "I said at the mud house that I believed you because I knew you. To my shame be it said that I spoke falsely. How dared you bewitch me? In your presence I flung away the precious hours in frivolity. I even forgot the Sabbath. For this I have myself to blame. I am an unworthy preacher of the word. I sinned far more than you who have been brought up godlessly from your cradle. Nevertheless, whoever you are, I call upon you, before we part never to meet again, to repent of your—" And then it was no mocker of the Sabbath he was addressing, but a woman with a child's face, and there were tears in her eyes. "Do you care?" she was saying, and again he answered, "Yes, I care." This girl's name was not Woman, but Babbie. Now Gavin made an heroic attempt to look upon both these women at once. "Yes, I believe in you," he said to them, "but henceforth you must send your money to Nanny by another messenger. You are a gypsy and I am a minister, and that must part us. I refuse to see you again. I am not angry with you, but as a minister—" It was not the disappearance of one of the women that clipped this argument short, but it was Babbie singing. "It fell on a bonny summer day, when the corn grew green and yellow, that there fell out a great dispute between Argyle and Arley. The Duke of Montrose has written to Argyle to come in the morning early, and lead in his men by the back of Dunkeld to plunder the bonny house of Arley." "Where are you?" cried Gavin in bewilderment. "I am watching you from my window so high," answered the Egyptian. And then the minister, looking up, saw her peering at him from a fir. "How did you get up there?" he asked in amazement. "On my broomstick," Babbie replied, and sang on. "The lady looked o'er her window sae high, and oh, but she looked weary, and there she espied the great Argyle come to plunder the bonny house of Arley." "What are you doing there?" Gavin said wrathfully. "This is my home," she answered. "I told you I lived in a tree." "Come down at once," ordered Gavin, to which the singer responded, come down, Lady Margaret," he says. "Come down and kiss me fairly, or before the morning clear daylight I'll no leave a standing stane in Airly." "If you do not come down this instant," Gavin said in a rage, "and give me what I was so foolish as to come for, I—" The Egyptian broke in. "I wouldna kiss thee, great Argyle. I wouldna kiss thee fairly. I wouldna kiss thee, great Argyle, gin you shouldna leave a standing stane in Airly." "You have deceived Nanny," Gavin cried, hotly, "and you have brought me here to deride me. I will have no more to do with you." He walked away quickly, but she called after him, "I'm coming down. I have the money." And next moment a snowball hit his hat. "That is for being cross," she explained, appearing so unexpectedly at his elbow that he was taken aback. "I had to come close up to you before I flung it, or it would have fallen over my shoulder. Why are you so nasty to-day? And oh, do you know you were speaking to yourself?" "You are mistaken," said Gavin severely. "I was speaking to you." "You didn't see me till I began to sing, did you?" "Nevertheless, I was speaking to you, or rather I was saying to myself what—" "What you had decided to say to me?" said the delighted gypsy. "Do you prepare your talk like sermons? I hope you have prepared something nice for me. If it is very nice, I may give you this bunch of holly." She was dressed as he had seen her previously, but for a cluster of holly berries at her breast. "I don't know that you will think it is nice," the minister answered slowly, "but my duty—" "If it is about duty," entreated Babbie, "don't say it. Don't, and I will give you the berries." She took the berries from her dress, smiling triumphantly the while, like one who had discovered a cure for duty, and instead of pointing the finger of wrath at her, Gavin stood expectant. "But no," he said, remembering who he was, and pushing the gift from him. "I will not be bribed. I must tell you—" "Now," said the Egyptian sadly, "I see you are angry with me. Is it because I said I lived in a tree? Do forgive me for that dreadful lie." She had gone on her knees before he could stop her, and was gazing imploringly at him with her hands clasped. "You are mocking me again," said Gavin, "but I am not angry with you. Only you must understand." She jumped up and put her fingers to her ears. "You see I can hear nothing," she said. Listen while I tell you. I don't hear a word. Why do you scold me when I have kept my promise? If I dared to take my fingers from my ears, I would give you the money for Nanny. And Mr. Dishart, I must be gone in 5 minutes." "In 5 minutes?" echoed Gavin, with such a dismal face that Babbie heard the words with her eyes and dropped her hands. "Why are you in such haste?" he asked, taking the £5 mechanically and forgetting all that he had meant to say. "Because they require me at home," she answered, with a sly glance at her fur. "And remember, when I run away, you must not follow me." "I won't," said Gavin, so promptly that she was piqued. "Why not?" she asked. "But of course you only came here for the money. Well, you have got it. Good bye." "You know that was not what I meant," said Gavin, stepping after her. "I have told you already that whatever other people say, I trust you. I believe in you, Babbie." "Was that what you were saying to the tree?" asked the Egyptian demurely. Then, perhaps thinking it wisest not to press this point, she continued irrelevantly, "It seems such a pity that you are a minister." "A pity to be a minister!" exclaimed Gavin, indignantly. Why, Babbie, how have you been brought up?" "In a curious way," Babbie answered shortly, "but I can't tell you about that just now. Would you like to hear all about me?" Suddenly she seemed to have become confidential. "Do you really think me a gypsy?" she asked. I have tried not to ask myself that question. "Why?" "Because it seems like doubting your word." "I don't see how you can think of me at all without wondering who I am." "No, and so I try not to think of you at all." "Oh, I don't know that you need to do that." I have not quite succeeded. The Egyptian's pique had vanished, but she may have thought that the conversation was becoming dangerous, for she said abruptly, "Well, I sometimes think about you." "Do you?" said Gavin, absurdly gratified. "What do you think about me?" "I wonder," answered the Egyptian pleasantly, "which of us is the taller?" Gavin's fingers twitched with mortification, and not only his fingers but his toes. "Let us measure," she said sweetly, putting her back to his. "You are not stretching your neck, are you?" But the minister broke away from her. "There is one subject," he said with great dignity, "that I allow no one to speak of in my presence, and that is my height." His face was as white as his cravat when the surprised Egyptian next looked at him, and he was panting like one who has run a mile. She was ashamed of herself, and said so. "It is a topic I would rather not speak about," Gavin answered dejectedly, "especially to you." He meant that he would rather be a tall man in her company than in any other, and possibly she knew this, though all she answered was, "You wanted to know if I am really a gypsy? Well, I am." "An ordinary gypsy?" "Do you think me ordinary?" "I wish I knew what to think of you." "Ah, well, that is my forbidden topic. But we have a good many ideas in common after all, have we not? Though you are only though I am only a gypsy." There fell between them a silence that gave Babbie time to remember she must go. "I have already stayed too long," she said. "Give my love to Nanny, and say that I am coming to see her soon, perhaps on Monday. I don't suppose you will be there on Monday, Mr. Dishart?" I cannot say." "No, you will be too busy. Are you to take the holly berries?" "I had better not," said Gavin, dolefully. "Oh, if you don't want them, give them to me," he said, and as he took them his hand shook. "I know why you are looking so troubled," said the Egyptian archly. "You think I am to ask you the colour of my eyes, and you have forgotten again." He would have answered, but she checked him. "Make no pretense," she said severely. "I know you think they are blue." She came close to him until her face almost touched his. "Look hard at them," she said solemnly, "and after this you may remember that they are black, black, black." At each repetition of the word she shook her head in his face. She was adorable. Gavin's arms, but they met on nothing. She had run away. When the little minister had gone, a man came from behind a tree and shook his fist in the direction taken by the gypsy. It was Rob Dow, black with passion. "It's the Egyptian," he cried. "You limmer, what are you that hae got haud on the minister?" He pursued her, but she vanished as from Gavin in Windyghoul. "A common Egyptian," he muttered when he had to give up the search. "But take care, you little devil," he called aloud. "Take care. If I catch you playing pranks with that man again, I'll wring your neck like a hen's." End of chapter 16. Recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. Chapter 17. of The Little Minister. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. The Little Minister by J. M. Barrie. Chapter 17. Intrusion of Haggart into these pages against the author's wish. Margaret, having heard the doctor say that one may catch cold in the back, had decided instantly to line Gavin's waistcoat with flannel. She was thus engaged with pins in her mouth and scissors hiding from her every time she wanted them, when Jean, red and flurried, abruptly entered the room. "There! I forgot to knock at the door again," Jean exclaimed, pausing contritely. "Never mind. Is it Rob Dow wanting the minister?" asked Margaret, who had seen Rob pass the manse dyke. "Na, he wasna wanting to see the minister." "Ah, then he came to see you, Jean?" said Margaret archly. "A widow man?" cried Jean, tossing her head. "But Rob Dow was in no condition to be friendly wi' onybody the now." "Jean, you don't mean that he has been drinking again?" "I canna say he was drunk." "Then what condition was he in?" "He was in a swearing condition," Jean answered guardedly. "But what I want to speir at you is, can I gang down to the Tenements for a minute? I'll run there and back." "Certainly you can go, Jean, but you must not run. You are always running. Did Dow bring you word that you were wanted in the Tenement?" "No exactly, but I want to consult Thomas Haggart about something." "About Dow, I believe, Jean?" "No, but about something he has done. Oh, ma'am, you surely dinna think I would take a widow man?" It was the day after Gavin's meeting with the Egyptian at the Kaims, and here is Jean's real reason for wishing to consult Haggart. Half an hour before she hurried to the parlour, she had been at the kitchen door, wondering whether she should spread out her washing in the garret or risk hanging it in the courtyard. She had just decided on the garret when she saw Rob Dow morosely regarding her from the gateway. "Whaur is he?" growled Rob. "He's out, but it's no for me to say whaur he is," replied Jean, whose weakness was to be considered a church official. "No that I ken," truthfulness compelled her to add, for she had an ambition to be everything she thought Gavin would like a woman to be. Rob seized her wrists viciously and glowered into her face. "You're ane o' them," he said. "Let me go. Ane o' what?" "Ane o' thae limmers called women." "Sal," retorted Jean with spirit, "you're ane o' thae brutes called men. You're drunk, Rob Dow. In the legs, maybe, but no higher. I haud a heap." "Drunk again after all your promises to the minister, and you said yourself he had pulled you out of hell by the root." "It's himself that has flung me back again," Rob said wildly. "Jean Baxter, what does it mean when a minister carries flowers in his pouch, ay, and takes them out to look at them ilka minute?" "How do you ken about the holly?" asked Jean, off her guard. "You limmer," said Dow. "You've been in his pouches." "It's a lie," cried the outraged Jean. "I just saw the holly this morning in a jug on his chimley." "Carefully put by? Is it hod on the chimley? Does he stand looking at it? Do you tell me he's fond like o't?" "Mercy me!" Jean exclaimed, beginning to shake. "Why is she, Rob Dow?" "Let me see it first in its jug," Rob answered slyly, "and syne I may tell you." This was not the only time Jean had been asked to show the minister's belongings. Snecky Hobart, among others, had tried on Gavin's hat in the manse kitchen, and felt queer for some time afterwards. Women had been introduced on tiptoe to examine the handle of his umbrella. But Rob had not come to admire. He snatched the holly from Jean's hands, and casting it on the ground, pounded it with his heavy boots, crying, "Greet as you like, Jean. That's the end of his flowers. And if I had the toppy he got them frae, I would serve her in the same way." "I'll tell him what you've done," said terrified Jean, who had tried to save the berries at the expense of her fingers. "Tell him," Dow roared, "and tell him what I said too. Ay, and tell him I was at the Kaims yestreen. Tell him I'm hunting high and low for an Egyptian woman." He flung restlessly out of the courtyard, leaving Jean looking blankly at the mud that had been holly lately. Not his act of sacrilege was distressing her, but his news. Were these berries a love token? Had God let Rob Dow say they were a gypsy's love token, and not slain him? That Rob spoke of the Egyptian of the riots, Jean never doubted. It was known that the minister had met this woman in Nanny Webster's house, but was it not also known that he had given her such a talking to as she could never come above? Many could repeat the words in which he had announced to Nanny that his wealthy friends in Glasgow were to give her all she needed. They could also tell how majestic he looked when he turned the Egyptian out of the house. In short, Nanny having kept her promise of secrecy, the people had been forced to construct the scene in the mudhouse for themselves, and it was only their story that was known to Jean. She decided that, so far as the gypsy was concerned, Rob had talked trash. Had he seen the holly in the minister's hand, and being in drink had mixed it up with the gossip about the Egyptian? But that Gavin had preserved the holly because of the donor was as obvious to Jean as that the vase in her hand was empty. Who could she be? No doubt all the single ladies in Thrums were in love with him, but that, Jean was sure, had not helped them a step forward. To think was to Jean a waste of time. Discovering that she had been thinking, she was dismayed. There were the wet clothes in the basket looking reproachfully at her. She hastened back to Gavin's room with the vase, but it too had eyes, and they said, "When the minister misses his holly, he will question you." Now Gavin had already smiled several times to Jean, and once he had marked passages for her in her Pilgrim's Progress, with the result that she prized the marks more even than the passages. To lose his good opinion was terrible to her. In her perplexity she decided to consult wise Tammas Haggart, and hence her appeal to Margaret. To avoid Kirsty, the humorist's wife, Jean sought Haggart at his workshop window, which was so small that an old book sufficed for its shutter. Haggart, whom she could see distinctly at his loom, soon guessed from her knocks and signs, for he was strangely quick in the uptake, that she wanted him to open the window. "I want to speak to you confidentially," Jean said in a low voice. "If you saw a grand man gey fond of a flower, what would you think?" "I would think, Jean," Haggart answered reflectively, "that he had gien siller for it. Ay, I would wonder." "What would you wonder?" "I would wonder how muckle he paid." "But if he was a minister, and keepit the flower, say it was a common rose, fond like on his chimley, what would you think?" "I would think it was a black burning disgrace for a minister to be fond of flowers." "I dinna haud with that." "Jean," said Haggart, "I allow no one to contradict me." "It wasna my design. But, Tammas, if a minister was fond o' a particular flower, say a rose, and you destroyed it by an accident when he wasna looking, what would you do?" "I would gie him another rose for't." "But if you didna want him to ken you had meddled with it on his chimley, what would you do?" "I would put the new rose on the chimley, and he would never ken the differ." "That's what I'll do," muttered Jean, but she said aloud, "But it micht be that particular rose he liked." "Havers, Jean. To a thinking man, one rose is identical with another rose. But how are you speering?" "Just out of curiosity, and I maun be stepping now. Thank you kindly, Tammas, for your humour." "You're welcome," Haggart answered, and closed his window. That day Rob Dow spent in misery, but so little were his fears selfish that he scarcely gave a thought to his conduct at the manse. For an hour he sat at his loom with his arms folded. Then he slouched out of the house, cursing little Micah, so that a neighbour cried, "You drunken scoundrel!" after him. "He may be a wee drunk," said Micah in his father's defence, "but he's no mortal." Rob wandered to the Kaims in search of the Egyptian, and returned home no happier. He flung himself upon his bed and dared Micah to light the lamp. About gloaming he rose, unable to keep his mouth shut on his thoughts any longer, and staggered to the Tenements to consult Haggart. He found the humorist's door ajar, and Weirworld listening at it. "Out of the road!" cried Rob savagely, and flung the policeman into the gutter. "That was ill done, Rob Dow," Weirworld said, picking himself up leisurely. "I'm thinking it was weel done," snarled Rob. "Ay," said Weirworld, "we needna quarrel about a difference of opinion, but—" Dow, however, had already entered the house and slammed the door. "Ay, ay," muttered Weirworld, departing. "You micht hae stood still, Rob, and argued it out wi' me." In less than an hour after his conversation with Jean at the window, it had suddenly struck Haggart that the minister she spoke of must be Mr. Dishart. In 2 hours he had confided his suspicions to Kirsty. In 10 minutes she had filled the house with gossips. Rob arrived to find them all in full cry. "Hi, Rob," said Kirsty, genially, for for gossip levels ranks. You are just in time to hear a query about the minister." "Rob," said the Glen Quharity post, from whom I subsequently got the story, "Mr. Dishart has fallen in what do you call the thing, Kirsty?" Birse knew well what the thing was called, but the word is a staggerer to say in company. "In love," answered Kirsty boldly. "Now we ken what he was doing in the country yestreen," said Snecky Hobart. "The witch has been bothering us sair." "The man's so full of flowers she sends him," says Tibbie Craik. "Jean's at her wits' end to ken whaur to put them." "Why is she?" It was Rob Dow who spoke. All saw he had been drinking, or they might have wondered at his vehemence. As it was, everybody looked at every other body, and then everybody sighed. "Ay, who is she?" repeated several. "I see you ken nothing about her," said Rob, much relieved, and then he lapsed into silence. "We ken a' about her," said Snecky, "except just wha she is. Ay, that's what we ken at bottom. Maybe you could guess, Tammas." "Maybe I could, Sneck," Haggart replied cautiously, "but on that point I offer no opinion." "If she bides on the Kaims road," said Tibbie Craik, "she maun be farmer's dochter. What say you to Bell Finlay?" "Na, she's U.P., but it micht be Loups o' Malcolm's sister. She's promised to Muckle Haws, but no doubt she would gie him the go by at a word frae the minister." "It's mair likely," said Kirsty, "to be the factor at the Spittals lassie. The factor has a grand garden, and that would account for such basketfuls of flowers." "Whatever she is," said Birse, "I'm thinking he could hae done better." "I'll be fine pleased with ony o' them," said Tibbie, who had a magenta silk, and so was jealous of no one. "It has not been proved," Haggart pointed out, "that the flowers came frae thae parts. She may be sending them frae Glasgow." "I understood it was a Glasgow lady," said Snecky. "He'll be like the Tilliedrum minister that got a lady to send him to the Gulch on the promise that he would marry her as soon as he got a kirk. She made him sign a paper." "The far seeing limmer!" exclaimed Kirsty. "But if that's what Mr. Dishart has done, how has he kept it so secret?" "He wouldna want a woman of the congregation to ken he was promised till after they had voted for him." "I dinna hand wi' that explanation o't," said Haggart, "but I may tell you that I ken for sure she's a Glasgow leddy. Lads, ministers is near aye bespoke afore their licence. There's a michty competition for them in the big toons. Ay, the leddies just stand at the college gates, as you may say, and snap them up as they come out." "And just as well for the minister's eyes uphaud," said Tibbie, "for it saves them a heap of persecution when they come to the like o' Thrums. There was Mr. Meikledrawn, the U.P. minister. He was no sooner placed than every genteel woman in the town was persecuting him. The Miss Dobies was the maist shameless. They fair haunted him." "Ay," said Snecky, "and then the tale o' the day, ane o' them snapped him up. Billies, did you ever hear o' a minister being refused?" "Never." "Weel, then, I have, and by a widow woman too. His name was Samson, and if it had been Tamson she would hae ta'en him. Ay, you may look, but it's true. Her name was Turnbull, and she had another gent after her, name o' Tibbets. She couldna make up her mind atween them, and for a while she just keeped them dangling on. Ay, but in the end she took Tibbets. And what do you think was her reason? As you ken, thae grand folk has their initials on their spoons and nickgowns. Ay, weel, she thocht it would be mair handy to take Tibbets, because if she had ta'en the minister the T's would have had to be changed to S's. It was thochtful of her." "Is Tibbets living?" asked Haggart sharply. "No, he's dead." "What," asked Haggart, "was the corp to trade?" "I dinna ken." "I thocht no," said Haggart triumphantly. "Weel, I'll warrant he was a minister too. I catch a woman giving up a minister except for another minister." All were looking on Haggart with admiration, when a voice from the door cried, "Listen, and I'll tell you a queer ane than that." "Dagont," cried Birse, "it's Weirwild, and he had been hearkening. Leave him to me." When the post returned, the conversation was back at Mr. Dishart. "Yes, lathies," Haggart was saying, "daftness about women comes to all, gentle and simple, common and colleged, humorous and no humorous. You say Mr. Dishart has preached ower muckle at women to stoop to marriage, but that makes no differ. Mony a humorous thing hae I said about women, and yet Kirsty has me. It's the same with ministers. Ay, at aince they see a lassie no unlike ither lassies, away goes their learning, and they skirl out, 'You dawtie.' That's what comes to all." But it hasna come to Mr. Dishart," cried Rob Dow, jumping to his feet. He had sought Haggart to tell him all, but now he saw the wisdom of telling nothing. "I'm sick o' your blathers. Instead o' the minister's being sweethearting yesterday, he was just at the Kaims visiting the gamekeeper. I met him in the Wast town end, and gaed there and back wi' him." "That's proof it's a Glasgow leddy," said Snecky. "I tell you there's no lady ava," swore Rob. "Ja, and wha sends the baskets of flowers then?" "There was only one flower," said Rob, turning to his host. I understood," said Haggart heavily, "that there was only one flower." "But though there was just ane," persisted Kirsty, "what we want to ken is wha gaed him." "It was me that gaed him it," said Rob. "It was growing on the roadside, and I plucked it and gae it to him." The company dwindled away shamefacedly, yet unconvinced. But Haggart had courage to say slowly, "Yes, Rob, I had a notion that he got it frae you." Meanwhile, Gavin, unaware that talk about him and a woman unknown had broken out in Thrums, was gazing sometimes lovingly and again with scorn at a little bunch of hollyberries which Jean had gathered from her father's garden. Once she saw him fling them out of his window, and then she rejoiced. But an hour afterwards she saw him pick them up, and then she mourned. Nevertheless, to her great delight, he preached his third sermon against woman on the following Sabbath. It was universally acknowledged to be the best of the series. It was also the last. End of chapter 17. Recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. Chapter 18 of The Little Minister. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. The Little Minister by J. M. Barrie. Chapter 18. Caddam. Love leading to a rupture. Gavin told himself not to go near the mud house on the following Monday, but he went. The distance is half a mile, and the time he took was 2 hours. This was owing to his setting out due west to reach a point due north, yet with the intention of deceiving none save himself. His reason had warned him to avoid the Egyptian, and his desires had consented to be dragged westward because they knew he had started too soon. When the proper time came, they knocked reason on the head and carried him straight to Caddam. Here reason came to, and again began to state its case. Desires permitted him to halt, as if to argue the matter out, but were thus tolerant merely because from where he stood he could see Nanny's doorway. When Babbie emerged from it, reason seems to have made one final effort, for Gavin quickly took that side of a tree which is loved of squirrels at the approach of an enemy. He looked round the tree trunk at her, and then reason discarded him. The gypsy had 2 empty pans in her hands. For a second she gazed in the minister's direction, then demurely leaped the ditch of leaves that separated Nanny's yard from Caddam, and strolled into the wood. Discovering with indignation that he had been skulking behind the tree, Gavin came into the open. How good of the Egyptian, he reflected, to go to the well for water and thus save the old woman's arms. Reason shouted from near the manse (he only heard the echo) that he could still make up on it. "Come along," said his desires, and marched him prisoner to the well. The path which Babbie took that day is lost in blaeberry leaves now, and my little maid and I lately searched for an hour before we found the well. It was dry, choked with broom and stones, and broken rusty pans. But we sat down where Babbie and Gavin had talked, and I stirred up many memories. Probably 2 of those pans that could be broken in the hands today like shortbread were Nanny's, and almost certainly the stones are fragments from the great slab that used to cover the well. Children like to peer into wells to see what the world is like at the other side, and so this covering was necessary. Rob Angus was the strong man who bore the stone to Caddam, flinging it a yard before him at a time. The well had also a wooden lid with leather hinges, and over this the stone was dragged. Gavin arrived at the well in time to offer Babbie the loan of his arm. In her struggle she had taken her lips into her mouth, but in vain did she tug at the stone, which refused to do more than turn round on the wood. But for her presence the minister's efforts would have been equally futile. Though not strong, however, he had the national horror of being beaten before a spectator, and once at school He had won a fight by telling his big antagonist to come on until the boy was tired of pummeling him. As he fought with the stone now, pain shot through his head and his arms threatened to come away at the shoulders. But remove it he did. "How strong you are," Babbie said with open admiration. I am sure no words of mine could tell how pleased the minister was. Yet he knew he was not strong, and might have known that she had seen him do many things far more worthy of admiration without admiring them. This indeed is a sad truth, that we seldom give our love to what is worthiest in its object. "How curious that we should have met here," Babbie said in her dangerously friendly way, as they filled the pans. "Do you know, I quite started when your shadow fell suddenly on the stone. Did you happen to be passing through the wood?" "No," answered truthful Gavin. "I was looking for you. I thought you saw me from Nanny's door." "Did you? I only saw a man hiding behind a tree, and of course I knew it could not be you." Gavin looked at her sharply, but she was not laughing at him. "It was I," he admitted, "but I was not exactly hiding behind the tree." "You had only stepped behind it for a moment?" suggested the Egyptian. Her gravity gave way to laughter under Gavin's suspicious looks, but the laughing ended abruptly. She had heard a noise in the wood. Gavin heard it too, and they both turned round in time to see two ragged boys running from them. When boys are very happy they think they must be doing wrong, and in a wood, of which they are among the natural inhabitants, they always take flight from the enemy, adults, if given time. When I see a boy drop from a tree, I am as little surprised as if he were an apple or a nut. But Gavin was startled, picturing these spies handing in the new sensation about him at every door, as a district visitor distributes tracts. The gypsy noted his uneasiness and resented it. "What does it feel like to be afraid?" she asked, eyeing him. "I am afraid of nothing," Gavin answered, offended in turn. "Yes, you are. When you saw me come out of Nanny's, you crept behind a tree. When these boys showed themselves, you shook. You're afraid of being seen with me. Go away then. I don't want you." "Fear," said Gavin, "is one thing, and prudence is another." "Another name for it," Babbie interposed. "Not at all. But I owe it to my position to be careful. Unhappily, you do not seem to feel, to recognize, to know what? Let us avoid the subject." "No," the Egyptian said petulantly. "I hate not to be told things. Why must you be prudent?" "You should see," Gavin replied awkwardly, "that there is a difference between a minister and a gypsy." "But if I am willing to overlook it?" asked Babbie impertinently. Gavin beat the brushwood mournfully with his staff. "I cannot allow you," he said, "to talk disrespectfully of my calling. It is the highest a man can follow. I wish—" he checked himself, but he was wishing she could see him in his pulpit. "I suppose," said the gypsy reflectively, "one must be very clever to be a minister." "As for that," answered Gavin, waving his hand grandly. "And it must be nice too," continued Babbie, "to be able to speak for a whole hour to people who can neither answer nor go away. Is it true that before you begin to preach you lock the door to keep the congregation in?" "I must leave you if you talk in that way." "I only wanted to know." "Oh, Babbie, I'm afraid you have little acquaintance with the inside of churches. Do you sit under anybody?" "Do I sit under anybody?" repeated Babbie blankly. Is it any wonder that the minister sighed? "Whom do you sit under?" was his form of salutation to strangers. "I mean, where do you belong?" he said. "Wanderers," Babbie answered, still misunderstanding him, "belong to nowhere in particular. I am only asking you if you ever go to church." "Oh, that is what you mean. Yes, I go often." "What church?" "You promised me not to ask questions." "I only mean, what denomination do you belong to?" "Oh, the is there an English church denomination?" Gavin groaned. "Well, that is my denomination," said Babbie cheerfully. "Some day, though, I am coming to hear you preach. I should like to see how you look in your gown." "We don't wear gowns." "What a shame! But I am coming nevertheless. I used to like going to church in Edinburgh." "You have lived in Edinburgh?" "We gypsies have lived everywhere," Babbie said lightly, though she was annoyed at having mentioned Edinburgh. "But all gypsies don't speak as you do," said Gavin, puzzled again. "I don't understand you." "Of course you dinna," replied Babbie in broad Scotch. Maybe if you did you would think that it's mair imprudent in me to stand here cracking claver with the minister than for the minister to waste his time cracking with me." "Then why do it?" "Because Prudence and I always take different roads." "Tell me who you are, Babbie," the minister entreated. "At least tell me where your encampment is." "You have warned me against imprudence," she said. "I want," Gavin continued earnestly, "to know your people, your father and mother." "Why?" "Because," he answered stoutly, "I like their daughter." At that Babbie's fingers played on one of the pans, and for the moment there was no more badinage in her. "You are a good man," she said abruptly, "but you will never know my parents." "Are they dead?" "They may be. I cannot tell. This is all incomprehensible to me." "I suppose it is. I never asked anyone to understand me." "Perhaps not," said Gavin, excitedly, "but the time has come when I must know everything of you that is to be known." Babbie receded from him in quick fear. "You must never speak to me in that way again," she said in a warning voice. "In what way?" Gavin knew what way very well, but he thirsted to hear in her words what his own had implied. She did not choose to oblige him, however. "You will never understand me," she said. "I dare say I might be more like other people now if I had been brought up differently. Not," she added passionately, "that I want to be like others. Do you never feel when you have been living a humdrum life for months that you must break out of it or go crazy?" Her vehemence alarmed Gavin, who hastened to reply, "My life is not humdrum. It is full of excitement, anxieties, pleasures, and I am too fond of the pleasures. Perhaps it is because I have more of the luxuries of life than you that I am so content with my lot." "Why, what can you know of luxuries?" "I have £80 a year." Babbie laughed. "Are ministers so poor?" she asked, calling back her gravity. "It is a considerable sum," said Gavin, a little hurt, for it was the first time he had ever heard anyone speak disrespectfully of £80. The Egyptian looked down at her ring and smiled. "I shall always remember your saying that," she told him, "after we have quarrelled." "We shall not quarrel," said Gavin, decidedly. "Oh, yes, we shall. We might have done so once, but we know each other too well now." "That is why we are to quarrel." "About what?" said the minister. "I have not blamed you for deriding my stipend, though how it can seem small in the eyes of a gypsy who can afford," broke in Babbie, "to give Nanny 7 shillings a week." "True," Gavin said uncomfortably, while the Egyptian again toyed with her ring. She was too impulsive to be reticent except now and then, and suddenly she said, "You have looked at this ring before now. Do you know that if you had it on your finger you would be more worth robbing than with £80 in each of your pockets?" "Where did you get it?" demanded Gavin fiercely. "I am sorry that I told you that," the gypsy said regretfully. "Tell me how you got it," Gavin insisted, his face now hard. "Now, you see, we are quarrelling." "I must know." "Must know! You forget yourself," she said haughtily. "No, but I have forgotten myself too long. Where did you get that ring?" "Good afternoon to you," said the Egyptian, lifting her pans. "It is not good afternoon," he cried, detaining her. "It is good bye forever unless you answer me." "As you please," she said. "I will not tell you where I got my ring. It is no affair of yours." "Yes, Babbie, it is." She was not perhaps greatly grieved to hear him say so, for she made no answer. "You are no gypsy," he continued suspiciously. "Perhaps not," she answered again, taking the pans. "This dress is but a disguise." "It may be. Why don't you go away and leave me?" "I am going," he replied wildly. "I will have no more to do with you. Formerly I pitied you, but—" He could not have used a word more calculated to rouse the Egyptian's ire, and she walked away with her head erect. Only once did she look back, and it was to say, "This is prudence now." End of chapter 18. Recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. Chapter 19 of The Little Minister. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. The Little Minister by J.M. Barrie. Chapter 19. Circumstances leading to the first sermon in approval of women. A young man thinks that he alone of mortals is impervious to love, and so the discovery that he is in it suddenly alters his views of his own mechanism. It is thus not unlike a rap on the funny bone. Did Gavin make this discovery when the Egyptian left him? Apparently he only came to the brink of it and stood blind. He had driven her from him forever, and his sense of loss was so acute that his soul cried out for the cure rather than for the name of the malady. In time he would have realized what had happened, but time was denied him, for just as he was starting for the mud house, Babbie saved his dignity by returning to him. It was not her custom to fix her eyes on the ground as she walked, but she was doing so now, and at the same time swinging the empty pans. Doubtless she had come back for more water, in the belief that Gavin had gone. He pronounced her name with a sense of guilt, and she looked up surprised, or seemingly surprised, to find him still there. "I thought you had gone away long ago," she said, stiffly. "Otherwise," asked Gavin the dejected, "you would not have come back to the well?" "Certainly not." "I am very sorry. Had you waited another moment, I should have been gone." This was said in apology, but the willful Egyptian chose to change its meaning. "You have no right to blame me for disturbing you," she declared with warmth. "I did not. I only " "You could have been a mile away by this time. Nanny wanted more water." Babbie scrutinized the minister sharply as she made this statement. Surely her conscience troubled her, for on his not answering immediately, she said, "Do you presume to disbelieve me? What could have made my return except to fill the pans again?" "Nothing," Gavin admitted eagerly, "and I assure you " Babbie should have been grateful to his denseness, but it merely set her mind at rest. "Say anything against me you choose," she told him. "Say it as brutally as you like, for I won't listen." She stopped to hear his response to that, and she looked so cold that I almost froze on Gavin's lips. "I had no right," he said dolefully, "to speak to you as I did." "You had not," answered the proud Egyptian. She was looking away from him to show that his repentance was not even interesting to her. However, she had forgotten already not to listen. "What business is it of mine," asked Gavin, amazed at his late presumption, "whether you are a gypsy or no?" "None whatever." As for the ring, here he gave her an opportunity of allowing that his curiosity about the ring was warranted. She declined to help him, however, and so he had to go on. "The ring is yours," he said, "and why should you not wear it?" "Why, indeed?" "I am afraid I have a very bad temper." He paused for a contradiction, but she nodded her head in agreement. "And it is no wonder," he continued, "that you think me a brute." "I'm sure it is not. But, Babbie, I want you to know that I despise myself for my base suspicions. No sooner did I see them than I loathed them and myself for harboring them. Despite this mystery, I look upon you as a noble-hearted girl. I shall always think of you so." This time Babbie did not reply. "That was all I had to say," concluded Gavin, "except that I hope you will not punish Nanny for my sins. Goodbye." "Goodbye," said the Egyptian, who was looking at the well. The minister's legs could not have heard him give the order to march, for they stood waiting. "I thought," said the Egyptian after a moment, "that you said you were going." "I was only brushing my hat," Gavin answered with dignity. "You want me to go?" She bowed, and this time he did set off. "You can go if you like," she remarked now. He turned at this. "But you said," he began diffidently. "No, I did not," she answered with indignation. He could see her face at last. You're crying," he exclaimed in bewilderment. "Because you are so unfeeling," sobbed Babbie. "What have I said? What have I done?" cried Gavin, in an agony of self-contempt. "Oh, that I had gone away at once." "That is cruel." "What is?" "To say that." "What did I say?" "That you wished you had gone away." "But surely," the minister faltered, "you asked me to go." "How can you say so?" asked the gypsy reproachfully. Gavin was distracted. "On my word," he said, earnestly, "I thought you did, and now I have made you unhappy. Babbie, I wish I were anybody but myself. I am a hopeless lout." Now you are unjust, said Babbie, hiding her face. Again? To you? No, you stupid, she said, beaming on him in her most delightful manner. To yourself. She gave him both her hands impetuously, and he did not let them go until she added, I am so glad that you are reasonable at last. Men are so much more unreasonable than women, don't you think? Perhaps we are, Gavin said diplomatically. Of course you are. Why, everyone knows that. Well, I forgive you. Only remember you have admitted that it was all your fault. She was pointing her finger at him like a schoolmistress, and Gavin hastened to answer, You were not to blame at all. I like to hear you say that, explained the representative of the more reasonable sex, because it was really all my fault. No. Yes, it was, but of course I could not say so until you had asked my pardon. You must understand that. The representative of the less reasonable sex could not understand it, but he agreed recklessly, and it seemed so plain to the woman that she continued confidentially. I pretended that I did not want to make it up, but I did. Did you? Asked Gavin, elated. Yes, but nothing could have induced me to make the first advance. You see why? Because I was so unreasonable? Asked Gavin, doubtfully. Yes, and nasty. You admit you were nasty? Undoubtedly. I have an evil temper. It has brought me to shame many times. Oh, I don't know, said the Egyptian charitably. I like it. I believe I admire bullies. Did I bully you? I never knew such a bully. You quite frightened me. Gavin began to be less displeased with himself. You are sure, inquired Babbie, that you had no right to question me about the ring? Certain, answered Gavin. Then I will tell you all about it, said Babbie, for it is natural that you should want to know. He looked eagerly at her, and she had become serious and sad. I must tell you at the same time, she said, who I am, and then we shall never see each other any more. Why should you tell me? Cried Gavin, his hand rising to stop her. Because you have a right to know, she replied, now too much in earnest to see that she was yielding a point. I should prefer not to tell you, yet there is nothing wrong in my secret, and it may make you think of me kindly when I have gone away. Don't speak in that way, Babbie, after you have forgiven me. Did I hurt you? It was only because I know that you cannot trust me while I remain a mystery. I know you would try to trust me, but doubts would cross your mind. Yes, they would. They are the shadows that mysteries cast. Who can believe a gypsy if the odds are against her? I can, said Gavin. But she shook her head, and so would he had he remembered 3 recent sermons of his own preaching. I had better tell you all, she said with an effort. It is my turn now to refuse to listen to you, exclaimed Gavin, who was only a chivalrous boy. Babbie, I should like to hear your story, but until you want to tell it to me, I will not listen to it. I have faith in your honour, and that is sufficient. It was boyish, but I am glad Gavin said it. And now Babbie admired something in him that deserved admiration. His faith, no doubt, made her a better woman. I admit that I would rather tell you nothing just now, she said gratefully. You are sure you will never say again that you don't understand me? Quite sure, said Gavin bravely. And by you will offer to tell me of your free will? Oh, don't let us think of the future, answered Babbie. Let us be happy for the moment. This had been the Egyptian's philosophy always, but it was ill suited for Iodlic ministers, as one of them was presently to discover. I want to make one confession, though, Babbie continued almost reluctantly. When you were so nasty a little while ago, I didn't go back to Nanny's. I stood watching you from behind a tree, and then for an excuse to come back, I poured out the water. Yes, I told you another lie. I really came back to admit that it was all my fault, if I could not get you to say that it was yours. I am so glad you gave in first. She was very near him, and the tears had not yet dried on her eyes. There were laughing eyes, eyes in distress, imploring eyes. Her pale face, smiling, sad, dimpled, yet entreating forgiveness, was the one prominent thing in the world to him just then. He wanted to kiss her. He would have done it as soon as her eyes rested on his, but she continued without regarding him. Oh, how mean that sounds! Oh, if I were a man, I should wish to be everything that I am not, and nothing that I am. I should scorn to be a liar. I should choose to be open in all things. I should try to fight the world honestly. But I am only a woman, and so, well, that is the kind of man I should like to marry." "A minister may be all these things," said Gavin, breathlessly. "The man I could love," Babbie went on, not heeding him, almost forgetting that he was there, "must not spend his days in idleness as the men I know do." "I do not." "He must be brave, no mere worker among others, but a leader of men." "All ministers are." "Who makes his influence felt." "Assuredly." "And takes the side of the weak against the strong, even though the strong be in the right." "Always my tendency." "A man who has a mind of his own, and having once made it up, stands to it in defiance even of his session, of the world. He must understand me." "I do." "And be my master." "It is his lawful position in the house." "He must not yield to my coaxing or tempers." "It would be weakness." "But compel me to do his bidding. Yes, even thrash me if you won't listen to reason." "Babbie," cried Gavin, "I am that man." Here the inventory abruptly ended, and these two people found themselves staring at each other as if of a sudden they had heard something dreadful. I do not know how long they stood thus, motionless and horrified. I cannot tell even which stirred first. All I know is that almost simultaneously they turned from each other and hurried out of the wood in opposite directions. End of chapter 19.